IVM.
Podcasting in India began in 2005. By 2006, there were 3,000 listeners in India. India has emerged as the third largest podcast listening market after China and US, with around 57 million listeners as reported in March 2021. All this was well thought out and visioned by a small little company called IVM Podcasts. Hi, I am Prashant Uttekar, a learning enthusiast, and you are listening to the Relearning Podcast. And today I'm delighted to have a conversation with Amit Doshi, founder of Indus Vox Media, famously known as IVM Podcasts, India's leading podcasting network, which was founded in 2015. And it's been a year since IVM Podcast has been taken over by Pratilipi, India's largest digital platform connecting readers and writers. Well, you know Amit. Regular listeners of the show already know that I've got this name Amit Doshi so many times in so many episodes, only to thank him to encourage me and many like me to do podcast. Amit has a huge interest in crime novels, basketball, actually NBA, technology of sorts, and he's easily misunderstood as a doppelganger for the other Amit, the famous Amit Shah. Well, welcome to the show, Amit.
Hi, how are you, Prashant? Glad to be here.
How many times do you get this? That is
the Amit Shah thing.
Yeah.
Dude, people who I like, it happens a lot. If you're big and you're bald and you're bearded, that's the go-to reference. I remember even Akash Mehta, who I didn't know at the time, and who's done work with us on multiple things, right? Way back when, this probably was in 2014 or 15, when the first Star Wars movie from the latest trilogy came out. I was at the movie theater to watch that because, of course, I was, and he was there as well, and he just anonymously took a picture of me and tweeted it as Amit Shah.
Oh, was that the origin story?
This has been there forever, right? Since Amit Shah came into prominence, people have been calling me, this. So it's not a new thing, but it was funny to me that I didn't even know Akash at that time, right, at all.
Oh,
and he tweeted this thing out back then. So that was funny.
I'm just wondering what you did after that for so many Halloweens. Well, let's not
Halloweens. Well, no, and also, dude, I'm 47. Halloween, those days are way in the past.
And I'm sure Amit Shah would not even be the prominent figure back then. I'm not too sure.
Oh, no, back then, I did stupid Halloween costumes. They were all, they were dumb costumes, man. You tried to make a point rather than trying to, have fun or kind of be in the mood. So, yeah.
Okay, superb. and thanks for sharing that. But it's not a miss, guys. And if you've not seen Amit Shah, I'm sure you've seen Amit Shah, but if you've not seen Amit Doshi, I'm going to have his photo on the thumbnail artwork. But of course, do look for Amit Doshi, IVM Podcast, and you let us know what is the resemblance there. Okay, I definitely want to talk about podcasting and everything, but first things first, I want to talk about NBA, if that's okay.
Oh yeah, dude, I'm all about that.
There you go, and we could just keep talking about it.
I woke up today in the morning and I was highly disappointed with what I was watching. So man,
I missed today actually. I just want to call out one name before we go anywhere further. Ja Morant.
Yes, my friend.
This guy has, and I've tweeted it last year. Look out for this guy. They couldn't make it further in the tournament last year.
I know.
But this guy is amazing.
He's ridiculously good. So I'm a Philadelphia 76ers fan. That's my team, right? Through and through. I was born in Philadelphia. I went for games when I was a 4-year-old, 5-year-old kid. Nice. That's my team. But I almost, since we're in India, I almost every year pick a second Western Conference team. Because what happened, one of the big reasons is that Western Conference games start later in the day, later in the morning than Eastern Conference games start, right?
Yeah.
So most Sixers games start at depending on the time of the year, 4:30 or 5:30 in the morning, maybe 6:30, but it's really early when they start, right? Western Conference teams generally start at around 6:30 or 7:30 or 8:30. Today, I think there was a game that started at 9:30 in the morning.
Is it?
And so I always pick a Western Conference team. And for the last few years, first with KD and then with Steph, it's been the Golden State Warriors
Of course.
because they're fun to watch, right?
Amazing. Yeah.
But last year, while watching the Golden State Warriors play Memphis Grizzlies in the play-in game, right? I saw John Morant. I was like,
Yeah.
holy shit, this guy is incredible. And I'd seen a couple of Grizzlies games before, but again, the Grizzlies don't play the Sixers all that often.
Yeah.
And even if I'm looking at Memphis versus Golden State, which they do play a little bit more, I don't think I'd seen him play in person, right? I was aware of the name. I'd seen some highlights, but I'd never seen him play in person until, or like see him play a full game until I saw that Golden State play-in game, and I was just like, dude,
He is. Yeah, a big bet.
He's something else, man. Did you see the Minnesota game like a couple of days ago?
Yeah.
5 points in the last 7 seconds, man. I mean,
yes,
what was that?
Yeah. And the guy is incredible. I mean, look at the confidence, right? And he's dunking over. He's doing everything that he wants to do. No, but Ja Morant and another guy that is my favorite, and again I've been following him, Luka, and he again keeps and he is a surprise. Have you seen? Did you follow the FIBA games?
Honestly, that's the most I've seen of Luka. I saw a bunch of the Olympic games.
Yeah.
I have not watched much Dallas Mavericks because they're kind of boring except for Luka.
Yeah. I get that,
they're mediocre. They're a mediocre-ish team. I mean, like they have a great player, but they're a mediocre-ish team, right?
Fair.
So again, if they're playing the Sixers or something like that, and I think the last time they played the Sixers, Luka was out. So I didn't see him at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, I mean, like I hadn't seen him all that much either, right? Because again, I'm very focused. Like I watch the Sixers for the most part, and then I'll watch like all kinds of stuff during the playoffs, right? During the playoffs, I'll watch everything, right? But so I've seen, it's not that I haven't seen Luka. He's been in the playoffs, but I don't think he's made it past the first round. And the first round is when there are a lot of matches happening at the same time, or a lot of games happening at the same time.
Yeah.
So I haven't seen Luka that much, but wow, man, I love talking about the NBA clearly, right? Because I mean, like even in like we spent 5 minutes on this, and I feel like I can go for another hour.
But let's go to some of the things the other love that you have, which is podcasting.
Absolutely.
What in the world made you move to something called as audio or podcasting in India when there was nothing? Or I don't know if there was something, but what was that move like?
So there were things, right? But again, the things were being done in a extremely hobbyist kind of way. Right.
Okay.
So, for example, there was IndieCast, which was out, right? Those guys had been, I think they started in like 2006, 2007, but they were irregular, right?
When literally podcasting started, 2005 or 2006.
Yeah. They started back then, but they were irregular, right? They'd do like, you know, in 1 month, they'd do 10 episodes and they'd be off for a month. Then they'd do 2 episodes in a month, then they'd be off again. Then they'd do 4 episodes for 2 months in a row. Then again, they'd go off. So the thing is that one of my things is that I've always, and this comes from my consumption, right? I feel like podcast listening is very habitual. Yes. You find the things that you want to, and you kind of establish them within your routine, and you kind of go from there, right? Sure. So like for me, This Week in Tech is one of my favorite shows. Okay. I will listen to it almost always every Monday. I'll listen to it on my way to work. I'll listen to it on my way back. It gives me a great idea of what's going on. And like, you know, it's a good overview show on the technology space. It's a long show, but again, I mean, like, you know, between the commute and the exercise and all that kind of stuff, you know, you get like, you know, I can do an hour and a half, 2 hours a day of listening if I need to. And so I generally do that on Mondays with This Week in Tech because it's a 2-hour show. I have favorite basketball shows, right? It used to be the Open Floor podcast. It's now the Mismatch. But I mean, like, you know, I have favorite NBA podcasts that I listen to all the time too, right? So, I mean, like, you know, and these things are all habitual, right? I listen, like, for example, Friday evening on my way back from work is a NBA podcast time, right? And so it's almost always the Mismatch, right? Yeah. Because I think the Mismatch is, it's all, yeah, so I mean, like, you know, it's whichever one you find. I don't think it's a Mismatch on Friday evening. But I mean, No, but again, no, my point being that it actually turns into like, the same, like I have certain days I listen to certain things.
Yeah.
And then the rest of the times you listen to other things, right? There
True.
are some shows that you want to listen to as soon as they come out. And that's what I mean by habit creation, right? Podcasts
Yes.
turn into habits. So that was one of the challenges I saw. The other thing, right, or that's one of the reasons why I saw the market is open, right? And the other thing, which is kind of, which really got me interested, right, is so if you think about media, right, you can at this point in time kind of break them up into three broad things. There is text, there is audio, there is video. In the future, there will be VR or AR or whatever you call it. But right now, there is text, audio, and video, right? These are the three quote unquote mediums of content creation, dissemination, what have you. Now, let's break them down a little bit further. In text, you have books, magazines, right? Newspapers.
Yeah.
Newspapers and magazines have been replaced by the internet, like your websites or apps. Same thing you can look at when you talk about books. They've been replaced by the Kindle. Now, I'm not saying that there is a complete replacement that's happened at this point in time. Obviously, it's a work in progress, and there is movement in all senses. But you can see the direction clearly, right? That books are going to be ebooks rather than paper books. Why are we destroying this is what's going to happen in the long run, right? Now you look at video. What you see is generally in video you have television and you have film. These are the two big kind of players, right? In television's pretty like television's moving towards YouTube type things. It's moving towards OTT type things, right? Same thing when you look at film, right? I mean, like movies are replaced, like movies are Netflix, movies are Disney Plus, right? I mean, like this is what you're gone from the theater experience, which used to be a part of your day to day, has now become it's an experiential kind of thing that you do, right? I don't know about you, right? But I used to go for movies all the time. And when I used to go for movies all the time, I was price sensitive. Now I don't go for movies all the time. Now I'll go for like a movie every 2 months, every 3 months, right? Again, pre-pandemic, right? And so for me, then the entire movie-going experience became experiential, and I'm no longer price sensitive. So I want to go to the really fancy movie theater with the big ass seats, and they come and serve you shit, and you know what I mean?
Pampered,
so I mean, like, I've become much less price sensitive because I don't go for the movies as often.
True.
You're price sensitive on your OTTs, right? I mean, like, you keep looking at them and you're like, hey, how do I get rid of a couple of these subscriptions every month?
True, man.
Yeah. So that's your that's your video thing, right? Sorry, just to complete the point, to come to audio, right?
Yeah.
Now, if you look at audio is broken up into two broad areas. Audio is music and audio is talk, right? Now, when you look at music audio, you have seen an evolution from radio to CDs, DVDs, to tape,
there's a reference.
What have you.
There's a reference.
You've gone from all of that to Spotify and Ghana and Savan and that, right? So you've gone to this kind of digital platform,
right?
And now in audio, when it comes to talk, in other international markets, what you've seen is talk radio has moved into this kind of thing, right? Talk radio has moved into a podcast.
Right.
India, there is no talk radio. Right?
Correct.
So that means that India is essentially a virgin market for all kinds of talk content. Right? Now that is that there are negatives and pluses,
of course,
to this fact. The positive of this fact is that basically it's an open market. There's no competition, or there's minimal competition. The negative to this fact is that you have to educate the market.
For you, when the shit hit the fan, actually, because the idea is great, but that education part, and you are the business guy or want to set up something, how did that go about? And I know this is 2015, where regulations, I'm also not sure are how easy or difficult were they, or how did you deal with that?
So honestly, in 2015, regulations were not a problem. Regulations are becoming an issue in 2021, because in 2015, podcasting was in this kind of weird little space where it didn't really come under the IT Act in a big way. At least they had not kind of explicitly called it out in certain things, right? Now there is a different issue, and you have to become part of grievance redressal, and there's a whole notification around like things you're supposed to do now. So now we're kind of putting it together. But back then, it wasn't really an issue.
Okay,
Did I answer
interesting.
your question? No, I don't think I answered your question.
No, you didn't.
That was the second part of your question. What was your main
Yeah.
question?
The main question was more around when it should hit the fan, because there are a couple of angles to
Yeah.
it. Finance angle, you as a great idea, but again, it's still an idea. When it
Yeah.
literally want to do things, how difficult was that journey? Because I'm confident that was not easy.
It wasn't easy, but at the same time, to be honest with you, I mean, like nothing worthwhile is easy, right? I mean,
Ah,
like, and also it wasn't, I mean, like it was doing stuff, right? I mean, like at the end of the day, it wasn't like I had to like, I'm not inventing something here, right? I'm not like, trying to like, as they say, it's not rocket science, right? There's work involved. Don't get me wrong. There's work involved. It's
yeah,
complex work. It's hard work. I mean, like you've been running a podcast now, you know how much work
yeah,
there is in
yeah.
putting an episode together. So I'm not saying that there's no work involved, right? But at the same time, it's work, it's effort,
Mhm.
right? That's most of what's involved, right? And I mean, like, so I mean, like when we started doing our recordings, like I mean, like for I'm sure you have heard this story because I know that you like listening to Cyrus's show,
Yes.
and so we've spoken about this many times on that show, right? But I mean, like how did the whole thing kick off, right? Which is basically we bumped into each other at Starbucks, and I was just like, "Hey, dude, want to do a podcast?" He was kind of,
Mhm.
he was waiting for a meeting with TV18 folks to figure out the renewal of his show, and he's like,
Right.
"Hey, man, I think I might be interested in doing a podcast." And so then we met and we talked and we kind of just like figured some stuff out, and yeah, I mean, like but when it came to doing it, what was involved from our end, right? I think for the first, not think, I know for the first few recordings, so there's a woman named Chavi Sachdev. So she
Yes.
helped out with the
Yes.
first few recordings that we did. She was initially supposed to be a part of IVN, but things didn't work out at that point in time. But I mean, like we I don't think that we ended on a bad note, but it just didn't work out. But again, so she helped out with some of the recordings. We booked a studio space. We just went in there. We tried some shit out and
Nice.
tried to see what
Nice.
works, right?
Yeah.
We did, I think, 2 or 3 practice sessions, and then we just kind of like, hey, okay, we're good. Let's go. Let's do this.
Road balling. Yeah. You
Yeah.
you spoke of something like IndyCast, or the initial days at least, and
Mhm.
I still get an insight of what you said. And when I spoke to you about podcasts around pandemic, you simply
Mhm.
said, "Don't wait, get the stuff out, be consistent about it," and that
Yeah.
still is the greatest advice, Amit. Very recently, I
Okay.
was talking to someone who said that complexities of how, what, and everything. So I gave him little things, but the most important advice that I passed on, basically, that you decide a day. It could be every week, every
Yeah.
month, or whatever that is. Be consistent. Have those 10 topics. Be consistent, and by third or fourth, you'll
You'll
know
know
it
what
by
you're doing.
yourself. Yeah. And I think
Yeah.
that is the greatest piece of advice, Amit. I mean, and I salute you, Mr. Amit Doshi. Reason is, back in 2015, you didn't know, you had a greatest idea. You knew, had a reference of the international audience and everything. And even that time, initially, I remember, even though there were podcasts, they were still catering to NRI audience. By
Hmm.
when you got into it, you were a revolutionary man. Let me just give you the name here, the podcast man of India. And there you go. You accept it or not, you're being called that. But it was so amazing, because last year, around 2019 onwards, we have
Hmm.
seen so many OTTs and big players coming into the market of audio. The Joe Rogan thing, even Indian podcasters who've
Yeah.
taken big, and that's so beautiful to see. And it's no longer catering to an audience which is outside India. These are amazing content. This is amazing stuff which is happening within India. So what is that
Yeah.
context for you now?
So I mean, like my belief has always been this, right? That why do we? Well, so India did not have talk radio, not because Indian people are not interested in hearing people talk, right? Not
True.
because Indian people cannot talk, right? Both of these propositions are clearly false, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
like Indian people love to talk. We have this, and we have this ancient tradition of oral storytelling that's been
Yeah.
around
Yeah.
forever. I mean, like so. I mean, like there's the reason why we did not have talk radio was a regulatory issue, right? I mean, like.
Oh, is
To
it?
kind of to kind of get in the weeds a little bit, right? I mean, like sorry, there's a little bit of history of media in India, if you will, but or the
Oh,
history of
sure.
this. But All India Radio was the only mechanism for radio for a very long time. They came out with a few extra channels in the late 80s, early 90s, sometime like that, right? But earlier there was only this one channel, right? Then a few more channels came in. When these additional channels came, or these additional radio channels came in, they used to do like these programmed hours, 2 hours of like MTV and 2 hours of not MTV, sorry,
English.
Time English, right? So Times would
right.
do 2 hours, and Midday would do 2 hours, and so there were all these different production companies which were doing 2 hours in these kinds of contexts, right, on radio. Post that, and so this is all government radio. Now liberalization occurs, at which point in time a FM radio band licenses are starting to be made available. There was an All India Radio license of FM band at that time, but other FM radio stations were starting to come into play. Now in India, the way that these laws are written, or rather the way that these licenses are dispersed, right? One of the key things that they mention in the license agreement itself. So there are two factors to this. One is what's in the agreement about the kind of content you're allowed. So this is no news and current affairs content allowed.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
So when you say no news and current affairs, this is a broad enough brush that it makes talk almost impossible. Right? Because how are you, so what can I talk? I can't talk about cricket because that's a current affair in some ways. Right? Now, you don't know, see again, like the thing is that you try and set up, the thing is that you can't also, you need clarity on this, right? And so when news and current, because the costs are so high, okay, for setting up a radio station, the licensing costs, right? So in the last FM auction that occurred, the cost of a station in Bombay and Bangalore was 150 crores for a 10-year license, 180 crores for a 10-year license in the Delhi NCR region. Okay. So this is the cost for a 10-year license. Now, that's just one single licensing cost component. Now you start adding in some of the other costs that come in, right? You start adding in basically the annual fee that you have to pay for the radio. In addition to that is 10% of that or 6% of revenue. That's the additional licensing cost that comes in. Okay.
Wow.
So every year, in addition to the 180 that you have to pay either 18 or 6% of your revenue, whatever is higher. Okay. In addition to that, let's look at a transmission piece, right? Now, the thing is that these are large cities. You need to be able to transmit to them. There are very few places, because of the way that construction works in our cities, there are very few places where you can actually place a radio tower. In the case of Bombay, that is the All India Radio Tower, the DD Tower that exists in Worli. It's the only place where you can cover the entire city. So now the cost of putting your radio tower over there is exorbitant. Okay. So basically what winds up happening is that your investment is so high that you're not going to screw around with this current affairs and news definition.
True.
Right?
Oh, yes.
Because somebody can come after you saying that, hey, cricket is current affairs. Current affairs means what's happening in the world right now. Okay, so you can't create a sports radio station. You can't create a political radio station. You can't create a news channel. You can't create any of this stuff. FM stations today are only allowed to play content which plays as or basically news which is scripted by All India Radio. That's the only news there. Yeah, all news that plays, all news breaks or all news briefs you hear on FM stations are All India Radio scripts.
Okay. That's a new information for me. Okay.
Yeah. No, but again, the thing is, they're not allowed to do news on their own. They can't do their own news. They can't have.
Can they have a point of view?
No, because again, that's current affairs.
Okay.
So and again, if you're somebody putting in these kinds of monies into it, you're not going to take a chance.
Obviously, yeah.
And there's a second factor to it as well, right? I mean, like, so one is the fact that the content is restricted. The content is restricted with the licensing cost, right? I mean, like, so these two things are there, but the licensing cost leads to another issue that you must consider. What happens with the licensing cost is that with the licensing cost being so high, you need to generate massive amounts of revenue. Okay.
Obviously.
When you look at international markets, music is a much bigger market than talk is. Talk is a big market, but music
not
is
as big as
music is twice as big.
Yeah.
So now you've invested so much money. The government has incentivized you to be very careful about the content that you're putting out over there.
Scary.
You're going to create a music channel. Why would you create anything but a
Yeah.
music
Yeah.
I mean, a music channel
True.
is not safe, but it's relatively safe. So this kind of this whole scenario around radio, where we don't have this stock content available, kind of, that led me to the thought that we are going to basically go like talk content can happen in India directly digital. No, but the leapfrogging effect, right, is something that we've seen in India over and over again, right?
True.
We did not go into deep penetration of broadband internet the way the other parts of the world did. We went straight to mobile.
Yeah.
Right. So the thought in my mind was that even in audio content, we will have a leapfrogging effect that occurs.
Okay.
Right. Where basically we will not get into like a radio-based distribution. We'll go straight digitally. So that was some of the thinking behind this. And we're seeing that play out to a great extent right now. Because even back then, I was very focused on creating content for India. Everything we did we did for like, this is Indian content, local content based for this particular country. So that's always been the focus of what we're doing. And the reason being that I thought that the opportunity was there.
And rightly so, man, because I've been following IVM, and especially Cyrus Says. I think I realized and found out Cyrus Says much around 2016. And after that, of course, I heard everything.
You were a very early listener. Yeah, you were a very early listener.
And I heard everything.
I remember it was really encouraging back then, right? Because I mean, like, you tweeted us regularly, you'd write stuff to us. I was back then, like, I mean, like, because again, the numbers were small, right? Back then, I mean, like, we're doing like a couple of thousand downloads on an episode. And I mean, like, and again, for, I mean, like, I get that in many cases, those are decent numbers for a lot of podcasters. But I mean, like, Cyrus Brocha is a fairly well-known face, right? And so we want him to, those were not numbers that we were satisfied with, if you get, right? But the fact that we saw so much passion coming from listeners like you, I don't know if you remember Abhay Anturkar, the briefless attorney.
Yeah, the briefless attorney, I definitely remember.
Yeah, you guys were like some of our early kind of like, really
supporters, right? And that was, and
yeah.
In fact, like, do you remember that guy who wrote about things I don't want to learn about Cyrus that I still learn about and still I get to know from the episode?
Yeah, I do remember.
That was me.
That was you. Yeah, I know that was you.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah. And I think the thread still continues. People are still adding.
Oh, really? Yeah. Wow. Okay.
Oh, yeah. it's pretty interesting. And I'm not sure. I think I should, and I'm sure there is a,
retweet it again, dude. It's been a long time since I've seen it. You should retweet it again, especially if the thread has got new stuff in it.
So but again, so the point that I was trying to get, again, this happens whenever we mention Cyrus and IVM and you, that we digress, which is amazing. That's what I learned from Cyrus. The point is, initially, there were only so many people could relate to this. But now you are doing stuff in Kannada, you are doing stuff in Hindi, you are doing stuff in amazing things. And the other day, when I was interviewed, Adesh, who's a CHR of Tata Communications, and many corporates, and I speak to a lot of them, right? Someone from TMTC, Tata Institute of Training. Everybody wants a podcast. Everybody wants a podcast, maybe not public, but within their organization. They want people to come and talk. So talk is gaining that momentum. And that's such a great news for you, right?
No, it is. I mean, it's a big part of our business, right? I mean, like making podcasts for brands, right? In different ways. I am not trying to sell here. But I mean, like, it is a big part of what we do, right? We are working right now on like internal podcasts for like oil companies and stuff like that, which are not meant for public consumption, right? But which are meant for like, intranet and stuff like that. So we're working on that kind of stuff. We're working on, I mean, like, we have public branded podcasts as well that we do. Like, I think Cyrus, I know Cyrus recently did something for Kotak. We've done some stuff for Bank of Baroda. So we work on like, we've done, we did some work with Global Victoria recently. So we've been working on quite a few of these branded podcasts as well, like, which are for public consumption.
Very interesting. Now, over the period of time, Amit, of course, it started with a podcast and now there are so many, and you have many people looking at stuff. It's definitely not possible to be vigilant about what goes around. So how much flack do you get from either listeners, regulators or stuff? What is that sense like?
So regulators have not been a problem yet, but we have to be cautious, and I think, are fairly cautious about the kind of thing that we put out, right? I mean,
Okay.
like, we're very clear that we're opinion, we're not fact, we're not news. So I think that is part of it, right? But at the same time, we have to be cautious, we have to be respectful, we have to understand what are the constraints of working in a country like India. But at the same time, so far, we have not had much issue. And we say some shit, right? I mean, like, you've heard Cyrus,
Let's
we say
let,
some shit, right?
let's just touch wood
Uh,
there. Fair enough.
yeah. But I mean, like, no, I think that the thing is that we try and be, like, real to what we are and what our opinion is, right?
Hmm.
And I think that as long as you're that, I think most people are mostly okay with it. We don't try and poke any bears. It's
Hmm.
just, this is what we think. You know what I mean? So, and
Yeah.
I think that comes through to people. So far so good.
Hmm.
When it comes to people, it's a little different.
Yeah.
The fans and the haters, as you would call it, right?
Yeah.
So there are a lot of again, so I was listening to a podcast recently, right, by Scott Adams, the guy who
Yeah.
does the Dilbert podcast. So he was a guest on the Shane Parrish's Knowledge Project, and
Okay.
he brought up this concept, which I really kind of I think is pretty cool, right? It's that when you do something, you have to accept the whole package. You don't get to pick and choose the parts you want.
Very
There
interesting.
is an entirety to things,
Yeah.
right? In the sense that if we want to be a podcasting network of large
Yeah.
size in India,
Yeah.
part of that is going to be fanatical fans, and
It's
part
the
of
whole
that
deal. Yeah.
is going to be a bunch of haters,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's the whole package. You don't get to say that I only want the fans and I don't want the haters. That doesn't work, right? You're going to get both of them, and you just it's part of the deal. And so I
It's
mean, like,
part of that partnership. It's part of that companionship, or so to call marriage.
yeah,
You don't
yeah,
get the only the good parts. You get this. You get
yeah,
everything.
yeah,
Yeah.
you get the whole package.
Nice.
It's everything that's involved with it. And so I mean, like, I've been fortunate enough to be kind of like, I get a fair deal of respect as, like, somebody in the podcasting space who's done a lot of work early on, and I've
Yeah.
been fortunate in that. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that everything I've done is to everybody's satisfaction. People don't like some of the stuff we do. So, and I mean, like, so
Yeah.
be it.
I'm sure. I'm sure. Yeah. Let's continue this conversation with the podcast man of India after this break.
A wise man once said, traveling, it makes you speechless, then turns you into a storyteller.
Well, listen to such travel stories and experiences exploring India on the Musafir Stories with us, Saif and Faiza.
Catch us on the IVM website, app, or wherever you get your podcasts from.
I get this a lot, right? And the why, right? Because, and again, RSS is such a beautiful thing. The concept of RSS helps you, put it at one platform and diversify. That's the easiest one that comes to mind. How does that convert to you being the IVM guy? And there are many such platforms which have emerged, and they're amazing in their own sense. But how does that is there a competitiveness? Is it a fair play, or is it like, hey, you know what, this is great? Or do you guys offshoot from their energies and in the kind of work that happens? How does that work?
So I mean, like, it's it is a jungle. It is survival of the fittest to many
True.
degrees, right? In that sense, where there are two different views when it comes to RSS or when it comes to the open podcasting ecosystem, right?
Yeah.
One view is that it makes sense to pull people into our own app and keep them in our app.
True.
Right. So make our content exclusively only available on our app. Now, there are many advantages to this. I'll be very blunt. Many advantages to this, right?
Okay.
One is the kind of data that you get about your listener, what you can find out about what your acquisition cycles are. All of this kind of really plays into like a huge way, right? Mm-hmm. You don't like the negative of RSS is that I do not control any of the clients, or I control very few of the clients that people are consuming the content on. So that means my access to understanding what they are doing is significantly lesser than a Pratilipi.fm, a Kuku.fm, a Pocket.fm who are doing things. So, they're doing things in the way which is direct streaming, where everything is exclusively within their app ecosystem. And I think, listen, we'll find out what works, right? My own personal thinking around this, right, is that while there might be some space for that kind of content creation,
Right.
I do believe that the bigger masses of things will be when content is created in a manner where it can be listened to wherever people are consuming content. That's how you
Yeah.
achieve a bigger audience, right?
Right.
So now our content is available on Savan and Ghana and Spotify, which are each of them. Ghana and I don't remember Spotify's publicly declared numbers, but it's probably 50 million-ish at least.
Yeah.
Ghana and Savan are both 100 million-ish at least, right? In terms of the amount of distribution you're getting there. Apple Podcasts, while Apple is a small part of the Indian market, the Apple Podcast exists on every single phone that's out there.
True.
Google Podcasts exists on every Android phone that's been released in the last year, right? So it's my contention, right, that it makes more sense for us to be available in a open ecosystem rather than in a more tightly or in a place where your your app has to be the destination. Now, in our case, the app is not the destination. The content is the destination, right? The app is somewhat, they're important because all of the UXs matter, making sure
Obviously.
that they don't, all that stuff matters, right? But it allows us to make the content the center in some ways. So content matters even on the other apps, because again, without good content, you're not going to have anything. But
you can have your heyday, but it won't go anywhere. Yeah. No, you've not answered, but you answered.
I don't know that because I don't think there is a right or wrong here, right? The right or wrong will only be determined by time, right? At this point, these are two different approaches.
In fact, that leads me to another thing, right? India context, where are we right now in the audio or a podcasting journey? Where are we? So I know that for sure last year, and there used to be a saying which is still funny, that there are more podcasters than the listeners. But I think that dynamic has changed. So where are we in that journey?
So that dynamic was always more of a little bit of a sarcastic comment than a real thing, right? But at the same time, I think that how do I? So I struggle with that 57 million number.
Okay.
I feel like that 57 million number, based on everything that I have seen in the space, based on all the conversations that I have had with various different platform folks, right? With everywhere I look at it, right? And I just look at what is this. I feel like that number is capturing a lot of things which are not necessarily what we would consider to be a podcast.
Okay.
Let me ask you this question, right? Let me flip it on you.
Sure.
To say that there are 57 million podcast listeners in India means that there are more than 2 times the number of people who listen to podcasts are twice the number of people who are on Twitter. Does that sound right to you?
I wouldn't draw that parallel. If I were you, I would see. Another thing is, there are many listeners who probably are not on Twitter, or they only know a podcast, example mine, because they know an app because of a podcast. Even that's true.
But I'm not saying that it's 100% that podcast listeners are all on Twitter. Of course not. I'm not trying to say that at all. But just given what you see in the world, does it sound reasonable to you that there are 2x number of podcast listeners compared to Twitter users? I mean, I don't know. That just it doesn't strike me as right. You know what I mean? It just doesn't strike me as right. There may be more podcast listeners than Twitter users. Okay, I'm not saying that there aren't. There may be, but twice as many.
Why not?
And users. We're not talking about active posters. We're talking about users on Twitter.
But why are you drawing that parallel?
So Twitter is just one point of of this, right? Dude, I know most of the people who do podcasting in India.
Yeah.
Okay, most of them. If I add up all their numbers put together, when they talk about this, and you know how we are entrepreneurs, right? We all bada chada ke hi always talk. If I add them all together, I still don't come close to this kind of a number.
Okay. Interesting.
So I'm skeptical about this number, and the problem I have here, right, is I believe podcast is growing phenomenally well. Okay, I think that there's a lot of really interesting work happening here. I think the market is getting bigger and bigger. I think there are more and more people who are joining in. But when you see a number like this, which I don't think has a real basis, right, in terms of listenership numbers that we see, you are at some sense, right, you are kind of making the market a little weird, right?
That was my
Because
next question. Yeah.
There is an expectation,
Yes.
right, about what kind of numbers podcasts should drive.
Exactly. That right? was my next question. That there would be a corporate who will come to you. Hey, you know what, Amit? I hear this. I definitely want that share of pie. And
give me a million. Listen, there are 57 million listeners out there. I mean, get me a million listens on my podcast.
Right.
I mean, that doesn't sound like an impossible ask at that point, right?
True.
There are 300 million people on YouTube. Get me 3 million videos get me 3 million views on my YouTube video.
Wow.
That doesn't sound unreasonable, right? I mean, if you market it enough, you put it enough, you have to, I mean, it's expensive, etc., but you can do it. Right? But so it's.
So what's the number?
The thing is that, I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know right now. Right. But the thing is that kind of a number just, what it does, right, is it in some sense poisons the well.
Yeah.
Right. Because the thing is that you are having a conversation with somebody who's coming on for a sponsorship or somebody who wants to do a branded piece or what have you. Right. And the expectation mismatch is so kind of put into place over here. Right. And again, I know what we can do and I know what kind of numbers we can drive. But again, you don't want to drive shitty numbers. You want real numbers.
That's the thing, right? Look what you're asking for. Look what you're asking for. You might get it.
Yeah.
At but what cost? What is the,
exactly. Yeah. What's the point, right? I mean, so there's just some stuff here which makes me uncomfortable, right? In the sense that 60 million people is a lot of people. That's a lot of people, right? I mean, just in terms of the even if you look at the kind of content that's being consumed and this and that and all that kind of stuff, right? It's just a vast majority of the content right now is in English language and podcasting. When you look at the other platforms, they're doing a lot more in Hindi and some of the other regional languages, but they're still much newer, right? They've all been around for 2-3 years. They don't have deep catalogs yet. They have catalogs. They're building significant catalogs, but they don't have really deep catalogs yet. And let's be honest, Prashant, you and I both know that most of this research trails by 6 months from survey, right? When they are gathering the data and presenting the data, there is a 6 to 12 month kind of gap in these two activities.
So I get exactly what you say, and also they will say what they want to portray. And the inference drawn from that could be completely, like I said, look what you're asking for, you might get it. My simple question now is, what are some things that, what should someone look at from a business perspective when he's looking at podcasting and listenership? Those numbers, the way, example, there are many times I get very excited. Okay, this is a great, I know I see that, this is being consumed. Then I look at the second part, which is for how much duration. And that's been a consistent problem.
So duration is the good thing about podcasting, right? I mean, you asked me 2 questions here, right? So the first question, so let me answer the second question first, because I've already forgotten the first question. So I need to remind you, but I'll answer the second question first, right? So when you talk about listener behavior in terms of how they consume these things, right? There are essentially 3 platform types that exist for people to consume podcasts on. And I mean this when I'm talking about podcasts in our traditional sense, the RSS-driven podcast, right? The Kuku FM, Pocket FM, Pratilipi FMs are in a different category in terms of how they operate, right? But when you're looking at the RSS-driven podcast, there are 3 kinds of platforms that exist. Platform number 1 is your Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Pocket Cast, Castbox, Overcast, all of these podcasting apps, right? Pocket number two is is Ghana, Savan, Spotify, these kinds of OTT apps, right? And I would add Pratilipi FM, Kuku FM, Pocket FM, which we also put our content on, to that kind of a banner. And third is YouTube. Okay, so these are the three ways that I kind of think of where our distribution happens, right? The listenership on the traditional podcasts is really high. The engagement is really high. The completion rates are really high. When you start getting into Spotify, Ghana, Savan, and the other OTT type apps, the consumption rate is high, but not as high. So to give you this, right? So on the traditional apps, Apple has released a study, and you can see corresponding stuff in our data from the IVM app, and you can see that in some other places as well. 90% of listeners finish 90% of the podcasts.
Nice.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really good.
It's big. It's a large amount of consumption by a large number of the audience who downloads. Okay. Spotify and such have 60% completion rates. So it's a significant drop.
Yeah.
But it's not as bad as YouTube.
Okay.
Right? Now, YouTube is a 40% or less completion rate.
Interesting.
Right? So, for example, the IVM podcast channel, I think if I'm not mistaken, our average session time is something like 14 minutes.
Okay.
Right. So that's a pretty decent number, but it's about 30% of what the average length of our episodes are.
Oh, yeah. Oh, very interesting figures. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So basically each of the, and again, if you look at it, each of these things, the rate of consumption corresponds in some way to the funnel size. YouTube is the biggest funnel, right? You have pretty much everybody with a smartphone is on YouTube.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
Spotify, Ghana, Savan, and the other OTTs are smaller than YouTube, but they're bigger than all the other podcasting apps, at least from a usage perspective.
Yeah.
While Apple and Google Podcasts might exist on your phones, the usage on those are lower than what the usage on these are, right? Whereas these are more specialized tools.
Interesting insight. My first question was more towards what are the, again, I'm a corporate guy, right? What are the KPIs one should look at? That is, as a business or as the industry, is listenership still, or number of listeners or listenership, or the quantity or quality of what is that figure? Because for many industries, it changed time to time and people got it, but at what cost? Literally killed their business itself. So what is that for podcasting?
So for us right now, listens is still like the gold star number. Okay. Right. I mean, like that's still the number that you kind of look at over and above everything else. If you want to cut out all the bullshit, listenership is the only thing that matters. Everything else is secondary.
Sounds good.
Right.
Sounds good.
That doesn't mean to say that social media engagement is not an important metric, and that doesn't mean to say that general interaction or comments and stuff like that on like podcast platforms are not important or what have you, right? But the end all be all, the overall kind of this, the only thing, the thing that basically drives revenue is listening.
Okay. Now let's move the gears a little bit and get to your story, which is what have you relearned recently? When I say recent, it could be like last 30 minutes, pandemic, 30 years. So what is that recent for you, and what is the relearning?
So I'll tell you what this, right? So I realized I have a temper again. There was a...
Are we talking to the right, Amit? Yeah. Anyways, you were saying...
Yeah, the way you think I have a temper all the time. No, but so I feel like I do a good job of controlling my irritation, just kind of keeping things a little calm, right? I feel like I do a decent job. That's not to say that I don't get excited or upset or what have you, right? I'm a human being. I get I feel shit. But at the same time, I feel like I do a decent job of keeping myself calm, right? But so one of the things that happened in the pandemic, post-pandemic, if you will, right? So for the last 5-6 years, I have not had a car. I've been using Uber for all my travel. Now, once the pandemic once the pandemic happened and we started, once the pandemic is starting to ease up a little bit, right? It's not over yet, but once it started to ease up, we started going out more and we started doing going to work and meetings and this and that. But Uber has become less reliable than it used to be pre-pandemic, right? I mean, like pre-pandemic,
Yes.
I was always in a 5-minute get an Uber, and wherever I'm, I go to very limited places in Bombay.
You were Uber VIP or the gold star, so to say, right? You were Uber fanatic, actually. Yeah.
That was just the first year, dude. Did they send that Cyrus making fun of the fact that I used Uber a lot in the first year when nobody else knew about them, and they sent me some sort of certificate, right?
Oh, they actually did.
Yeah, they invited me to a party and shit, man.
Oh, wow. Nice.
I'm one of their top riders in the city. So, I mean, it was nonsense, yeah. But I mean, listen, it's great, it's PR, it's this and that. I went for the party because of that Olive, and I'm like, hey, Olive, I can get free meal at Olive, I should do that.
Nice.
Good
reason.
But post-pandemic, what's happened is that Uber's become a lot less reliable. So one of the things so basically we're starting to face the same problems in Bombay that people in Bangalore have been facing forever. You book an Uber, they will call you immediately to find out, hey, where are you going and how are you paying?
Yeah.
Right, and then they will not cancel appropriately, or they will cancel after they will wait for you to cancel.
They will for you to
wait around wherever.
Yeah.
And so basically now, instead of me being able to get a car in 5 minutes, sometimes it comes in 5 minutes, but more often than not, it's 15, 20, 25 minutes to get a car. Now, all of a sudden, it is no longer a reliable way for me to get from point A to point B on schedule.
Yeah.
And schedule matters to me. I feel like, to be honest, I have a fairly busy timetable, and so given that, I cannot be late, because if I'm late, it just screws everything, right?
Yeah, cascading effect.
Yeah. So I mean, like, I make an attempt to be on time, and then this is becoming a problem, and so I bought a car. And I bought a car, and I was like, dude, I can't have a driver. I can't pay somebody to just come and sit underneath my building for like 8 hours a day, because that's most of what the day is right now, right? It's go to work,
right?
Be at work, because most other offices are not working. So you're not going out and meeting people or anything like that, right?
Right.
And so I drove for like a month or two, right?
Nice.
And not nice. I understood why, I know. So, I mean, and temper affects temper, right? I mean, like, it's basically, I'm putting myself in a position where I'm getting irritated all the time. Buses, taxis, rickshaws, other drivers, people being like asses on the road, just stopping and whatever. So I'm just like basically putting myself in a position where I'm getting irritated for 2 hours a day, a sense of constant irritation. And that doesn't go away then.
It doesn't.
That low level irritation that you are feeling, it then expresses itself on people around you, and I'm not cool with that. So I got a driver because I realized that I do have a temper. It's just a question of how it gets triggered. Because I'm pretty cool about, like, if something happens, a single incident, and just like, I'm pretty cool about like managing with that. Not to say that I don't get irritated or I don't get this, right? But I think I'm pretty decent about managing that kind of stuff. But when this constant irritation that occurs, like, from Nepean Road to Khar, right, which is basically about 50 minutes of driving.
Yeah.
And that it just kind of stays in your head. It doesn't go away. And that it really did lead me to I realized that I was like, getting irritated over things that I should not be getting irritated over with basically other people in your life.
So now you're using the 2 hours with the laptop or the work that you can do at the back, and you're driven around. So that's fine.
Calls. I can do calls.
Yeah. And how's the temper after that?
It's much better. It really is.
It really feels like I'm doing one of my coaching sessions now. wait, Amit. No. Let's come back. And I hope it's an automatic. So whenever you want to do, like, go for a pan
it's an automatic.
Then it's fine. Should my next question was about your insights, but anyways, let's not go there. I don't even charge for that. So, okay. I get this a lot, right? And people saw this journey that I started off, and I mentioned you, and then they saw IVM. So obviously, some people knew, some didn't. But one question was common amongst the podcasters: how do I get there? How do I get to IVM Podcasts? And I could simply throw, hey, I knew Amit before that, or we were talking terms. But literally, that's the question, and that leads to another idea. Is IVM thinking something like that? That where toddlers, so to say, or new guys could really try some stuff.
So there are some thoughts around that, but I think the thing is that we think about where we want to position ourselves, right? As
Yeah.
a company, as a brand, as all of that kind of thing, right? And we want to ensure that we stand for high quality podcasts. So we
Sure.
spend a lot of time with a lot of people before we kind of create or before we put a new show out, right? Now that requires a certain amount of bandwidth, and there's only so much bandwidth available on the team, right? But it does mean that we want to kind of do that kind of thing, right? Yeah, Prashant. So I mean, like, some shows that we did bring on, like, which are external shows that we thought were really well produced, right? Like, so for example, your show, Musafir
Musafir.
podcast,
Yeah.
Musafir Stories came on, the Airball Diaries, which is an NBA show that we're doing. We have a Tamil show
Nice.
called Storytime Tamil. So these shows that are there that we kind of bring on, but most of the shows that are existing shows, which we know are somewhat fully kind of like this again, we hope to help. We hope to kind of like help you all kind of do like help with guests and just like make your lives a little easier in terms of what you're
Nice.
doing as well. But I mean, like these shows are a little easier to bring on, right? But for a new show, for fresh show, the amount of bandwidth required from the team is quite significant, right? Like
Yeah.
many shows, like
Yeah.
like one of the shows that we recently launched is a fantastic show, does really good numbers now, but I think we piloted it like every week for 3 months. Like every
Okay.
week we do a kind of, hey, how are we supposed to do this? How are we supposed to do this?
Nice.
Because it moved from conversational to like narrative to kind of funny to kind of serious to kind of like, how do we find the right tone, right?
Nice.
And so
Nice.
it takes time to kind of put some of this stuff together in a good way.
Interesting. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
So your firsts is something that you always remember, right? And this is my first podcast. I remember everything and I love it. And this is the first time I'm reaching the 50th episode. And it was never a target for me to reach 50th episode, but I feel like, there's 50 times that I've done this.
Yeah, it's a thing, man.
Yeah. What is your, now you have shows which have crossed 500 and you talk about it just like that, and 50 is nothing. But what was that first time then the first show did 50? What was that like?
I think it must have been Cyrus, because I mean, like, Cyrus was initially twice a week.
Nice.
Most of the earlier shows that we started were not initially 2 times a week, right? So Cyrus must have been the first one for sure to cross 50. If I remember correctly, right, and I'm pretty sure I got this right, that basically the 50th episode was the genesis of the Cock and Bull type show on Cyrus.
Oh, wow.
Right, which is basically the more not guest focused, but something where like, just people come and like, talk about whatever the hell they want to.
Nice.
I think we had done one before the 50th episode. And then the 50th episode was like, hey, let's kind of do this. This is working well.
It does.
Yeah, so, I mean,
and it's stood the test of time as well, man. And of course, I no disrespect to the guests, but those are the conversations you literally, whenever I'm driving you, I feel you guys are in the car. And I'm sure you get this a lot.
Yeah. No, but because they are less structured.
Yeah.
In some ways.
Yeah.
And also the other thing is that the Cock and Bull panelists are consistent, right? Like I'm probably on about 75% of those.
Yeah.
And whoever's producing for Cyrus is probably on like 100% of those while they're producing, right?
Yes.
So we went, so right now Antariksh is the main producer. Before that we had Abbas. Before that we had Naveen.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like, and so they're always there, right? And so it kind of, I think it works well.
No, it's beautiful. It's simply beautiful.
But that's the one that was the first 50th. And I mean, 50th, like, and it was a big deal for us too, right? Like, because at that time, I mean, like the idea of doing a podcast was kind of weird. Also, the thing is that most talent, right, has exposure to television more so than this, right? And so the expectation is always a seasonal approach rather than a week by week continuous, let's keep going approach, right? And so Cyrus was good enough to like kind of like, see that, hey, this is something that I think I would make sense to do. And he looked into podcasts. Cyrus presents himself as like, I don't know anything, but he knows shit. He acts like he's an idiot. He knows stuff.
Okay, if I have to another one is, if I have to wake you from deep sleep and ask you to do an episode, what would that be about?
Oh, wow. Okay. Interesting question. Depends on what's my bent at that point in time. What am I working on? Or am I working on? I think because again, working on is not fun, right? I think that I enjoy my work. Don't get me wrong, but at the same time, what I do for entertainment is the stuff that I obsess over in my head, right? More than I think this. So it really would depend on when you caught me, right? There was a time when it would have been like I'd love to do a podcast about the Wheel of Time books, or so it would be a time where. Right now, if you were to ask me, I'd say that I'd love to do a podcast about Chinese martial arts novels or crime novels.
I heard that episode. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I listened. I read a lot of them because they're quick reads. They're very fast reads, right? But I mean, I've been reading a ton of those, right? So I mean, it really does depend on what, right now I might want to be interested. One of the things that I've been watching on TV is I've been watching all these kind of engineering competition type shows. Right. So so there aren't that many of them, but I love the genre. So I'd like to see more of them. So there are some robot shows like Robot Wars and stuff like that.
Oh, that is nice. Yeah.
And there's a show on Discovery Plus called The Big Brain Theory with Kalpen as the host. Kalpen as the host.
That's a nice one.
Yeah. So I really enjoyed that. And then on Netflix a couple of weeks ago, something popped up, which I can't believe I actually watched. It was called Baking Impossible, where basically they're doing baking, but while doing baking, they're making things like boats and city blocks and like...
Meaning? So they're baking structures that big, is
they're baking structures. They're making They're doing baking, but while doing the baking, what they're actually doing is like they're making a boat that can travel like 10 feet in a feet in a trough of water, and it's a sailboat, so it has to travel by wind power.
Nice.
And it's just like dude, what the hell is this shit?
Incredible.
Right? Yeah, so I'm watching this, and I'm like, I'm really into this. So I could do a podcast right now on Baking Impossible, the show. So
nice.
There's so much stuff that comes up like that.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I have weird and varied interests. That's how I kind of put it, right? So I can
weird
do podcasts.
Is fine, yeah.
Yeah.
So what is your favorite thing about podcasting?
Honestly, conversations. Like I love doing Cyrus. Cyrus is a lot of fun. I really enjoy it. But for me, Cyrus is hanging out with Cyrus and Antariksh or Cyrus and Abbas or whoever, right?
Actually,
it's fun to do, but it's just hanging out, right? Shunya One to me is something I really enjoy doing because the people who you're talking to over there, right, are these are people who in the general course of things, I probably would not be just hanging out with, right?
Yeah.
And the kinds of things that you can talk about, the kinds of insights that pop up. And I'll give you an example. Okay. All right. So I think on Friday itself, or maybe the Friday following, we have an episode coming out with the founder of EduGorilla, right? And one of the things that he mentioned in that was that they have 1,500 apps. Okay. Wow. So what they do is they basically make apps for local exams, like MP Police exam. For these kinds of exams, they make basically learning apps for those kinds of things. And what they've realized is that they need to make an app for every exam. They can't have like a single app and then have people come there and study for exams.
Okay.
Which I think is really interesting. It's a very different approach. It's really interesting. But again, he says there's some these are the kinds of things that fire things up, right? I'm listening to that and I'm like, hey, should I have an app for every show? Because same kind of thing is content, is this, is that. That doesn't mean that you don't have a main app, but why not also have an app for every show? It was an insight which I had not really thought of before in certain way, in any real way, right? And so it was just like, wait, what? Okay, all right, yeah, that makes sense, right? So having these kinds of conversations is really valuable, right? And it's the conversations that we have on Shunya One to me are some of my favorite things that I do.
Nice, and thanks for that. And to all the podcasters or people who want to get into this, like I said, you're the podcast man of India. So what is that golden advice that you want to give?
What you mentioned earlier, just do it.
Be consistent. Just get the stuff out.
Yeah. My one of my favorite phrases, right? One of my absolute favorite phrases: perfection is the enemy of good enough. Okay.
Nice.
That doesn't mean that you half-ass things. Good enough is not half-assed. Good enough is good. right? But perfection is often unattainable, right? And I mean, like, I think that the pursuit of perfection prior to starting something is a fool's endeavor.
Nice.
Just start going. Just start doing it.
Yeah. So it's been a pleasure, Amit. And next time, if I have to call you or speak with you, I'll ensure I'll chip in another special episode just to talk to you. And this is no way to embarrass you, but also is. So please take my phone back. And thank you so much, Amit, for gracing the occasion of my last episode of the season and being such a wonderful guy that you are, and motivating me and many others who are listening or more than ever thinking of doing something like that. And if I get someone, I pass on the same advice. I just pay it forward. So thank you, Amit, for being Amit Doshi. And it's been a great recording and great catching up with you.
Thanks, man. Thanks so much for having me. This was fun. This was a lot of fun to do. Hey, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On this very special 150th episode of Advertising is Dead, Varun's in conversation with Pooja Dhingra, pastry chef, podcaster, and founder of Love 15 Patisserie. Do check out this episode for a look at her journey as a creator and entrepreneur. On Paisa Vaisa, Anupam is joined by Ravi Rahulaparthi, CEO and co-founder of Kapita FinTech. They discuss the problems when it comes to ESOPs, i.e. employee stock options. Facebook announced their rebranding and its ambitions on becoming a metaverse company. On Simplified, Tony, Chuck, and the others talk about what this means. On All Things Policy, Ruturaj Gowaikar and Aditya Parikh discuss the European Union's Arctic strategy. And on Say No to Drama, tune into episode Moodiness, My Birthright, as Chetna talks about how you can be as moody as you want to be. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And do follow us on YouTube. We have a number of different channels. You can find them on ivmpodcast.com/YouTube, where you'll be able to take a look at all of the channels we have. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors this week: Cred, Bank of Baroda, Quarter, CoinSwitch, Kuber, Slay Coffee, Intel, and Oxfam India. Thank you so much. You make this possible.
Do you wonder why China does the things that it does? Or want to know how we could improve online privacy? Or perhaps you're thinking about how we can kickstart India's economy. If you'd like to search for the answers to such questions, check out All Things Policy, a daily public policy podcast that covers everything from employment figures to aircraft carriers. Tune in from Monday to Friday for new episodes and fresh takes.